How do you think the economic future of the NFL with no fans in the stands for a season would affect everything and everybody?
Yeah, we're getting a little bit of a preview of this, Pat, with baseball because right now they're talking about all the testing and tracing and all the treatment that has to happen in baseball. That's the easy part. The hard part is getting the player concessions they're trying to do with the MLB and the MLBPA. And as you've been reading, that's a problem right now. We don't even know if we're going to have baseball, not because of health issues, because of the money, and we've seen the comments from players about that. We're going to see some of that in the NFL. Now, the NFL and NFLPA just did this 11-year CBA, and I'm sure they all thought, okay, we wanted to deal with these people for a long time, probably like 10 years. But here we are. They got to get back to it because here's the problem. We're going to see a diminution of revenues coming up. It's going to be due to no fans in the seats. It's going to be the lack of sponsor activation for game day, no parking, no concessions, merchandise. People don't realize how many revenues are wrapped up in game day. And without fans, you're not going to have any of that, including suite sales and premium seating and everything else. The question, how much of total revenues is that for the NFL? Before I answer, I think it's a lot less percentage than baseball, basketball, hockey, because NFL has such media contracts that dwarf ticket sales, and the NFL has revenue sharing that dwarfs all the other leagues. My best guess is lack of fans, overall revenues is going to be anywhere from 15 to 25% of total revenues. So if we're looking at a gross revenue situation for the NFL in a normal year of $15 billion, take that down 25%. Now you're talking about $12 billion. The players will feel that. Cap is set in 2020. This cap is set at $198.2 million. Per team. Player contracts are set. But you and I know there's no magic to that. Teams may look to go under this year because one of my criticisms of the CBA, there's not enough threshold minimum spending to keep teams accountable. They can spend less and they're only judged over a 4-year period in terms of what they spend on players. So what I'm thinking is we know the 2021 cap is going to be a problem because they're going to look back on revenues from 2020. I'm just thinking and sensing NFL owners are going to go to NFL players before 2020 and say, hey, we got a problem coming. Let's try to address it now so we don't have the specter of having a lesser cap in 2021 than we've had in 2020, something that's never happened in the history of sports.
Okay, so a lot of things are going to have to be adjusted here. So if the NFL and its GMs and owners go to the players before 2020 and say, hey, we have to readjust the 2021 contract right now because we think the salary cap's going to go down, but we also might not have the money to pay you. Let's push that to 2022 instead. Let's readjust this. That's going to be a lot of renegotiation for everybody's contracts that they're going to have to do. And I would assume that the veteran players are going to take the biggest hit for this, obviously.
Yeah, they are. And even in a normal year, that. Teams are taking younger players on those rookie contracts that are fixed, that are reasonable, that are easy to swallow, and cutting older players. That happens before the pandemic and it'll happen after the pandemic. But I think veterans are going to be squeezed even more this year and next year because, as I said, there are minimum salary requirements, but they're not strong. Accountability is low. So we may see teams, just offload veterans with non-guaranteed contracts to go light this year, know the cap is less next year, and we'll see all this happen. The reason I think it's going to happen before 2020 and not just wait till 2021, because the effect of perception on the union, on players saying, you're taking a cap lower in 2021 than 2020 is not a good one. So this idea is smoothing. That's the word we use. It's usually used when there's a big spike and they want to smooth it along the way. That's what happened with the NBA. But now you're using it on a decrease and you're saying, let's get ahead of this decrease. And I think 2020 will be affected.
That's so interesting to me. Can we talk about the debt limit being raised $150 million? Where is that coming from? Does the NFL have its own bank that you're allowed to go into? What is that money used for? And I didn't know that $350 million in debt money was available to every single NFL team. Now it's been raised to $500 million. What does that mean? What is it used for? And how do teams get that money?
The background is the NFL is the only major sports league that doesn't allow corporate ownership. You have corporate ownership all over other sports. You have private equity groups, you have hedge funds, you have all this corporate ownership, private equity in a lot in the NBA. NFL doesn't allow it because NFL has this kind of ancient tradition sitting around the table that I sat at for many years, even though I wasn't a billionaire. We didn't have an owner in Green Bay. So everybody's got a person, it's family owner, a lot of family ownership, having that one person that represents the team. This is the problem in Tennessee the past couple of years, finding that one person on the Titans ownership group and in Denver with the Broncos. So they haven't allowed that. So they have a debt limit because these aren't corporately owned teams. Their assets worth $2 billion, but their own profit, their own holdings, besides a top level of owners, really don't match that. So they've allowed teams to dip into this bank debt program they've had. Now, with future problems ahead and trying to save the cost of operations going forward, they're allowing teams to extend that debt limit, which they've never allowed previously. I think the big thing, Pat, is this a one-timer for this pandemic? Or are we going to continue to allow raised debt limits? Because listen, any business does not want all its principals being totally leveraged. And that's why they've had this limit. So they want people coming in with money. They got David Tepper to own the Carolina Panthers. He's a multi-billionaire. This is what they want. I think the big picture is down the road, they're going to have to allow corporate entities to own these $2 billion franchises.
So do they all have the same bank that they use? How are they transparent? Like, who's transparent with those numbers to say, yeah, you only took $350 million, you didn't take $400? Like, who are they? Just have access to your bank account? Is that how that works? Like, how's it monitored?
In some ways, there's this whole office inside 345 Park Avenue that people don't know about. It's called NFL Finance. And these are people dedicated to the financial pictures of all these franchises. And they're working with the teams on their debt. And usually it's not the owner directly. It's the owner's finance people, how their debt. When you come into the league, you have to prepare this book about where your money's coming from, how much you have, what's it going to, how leveraged are you. And yes, if you're applying to be an NFL owner, the first thing to look at is what's your liquidity, because you don't have to dive into these huge debt limits. So you come in like Tepper, worth billions, Stan Kroenke's worth billions, all these owners that have massive resources.
The Rams are allegedly out of money, is what they're saying. I thought the debt limit was raised specifically for the Rams, who are building that $7 billion monstrosity in the middle of LA, which, by the way, it's going to be beautiful, but it was expected to be $2 billion. Now it's triple. What is that? It's 350% of what they thought it was going to be. I mean, that is quite a swipe. Let's talk about transparency a little bit more, though, because you mentioned the MLB talking about how the players are not going to be pumped up about this. And we always thought whenever we went into a CBA negotiation is we can never get a good guess on the revenue split because they don't have their books open. The Packers were the only team that opened their books and they're publicly owned, so they kind of had to happen. Hey, were you there for that whenever the Packers opened up the books during the CBA?
I'll tell you, Pat, every year around June 15th, June 20th, I got a call from all the agents I was dealing with saying, hey, I know how to spend your profit. On my plate. And I'm like, yeah, we got our own vision of how we're going to spend that. Yeah, we were the only team, and every year I was involved in preparing those books a little bit and showing what we did. And the NFLPA has latched onto the Packers saying, hey, look, this tiny little team in northern Wisconsin is putting out, in my day, 20, 30, 40 million profit. In today's day, 50, 60, 70 million profit.
Never mind.
Imagine what the New Yorks and Dallases and New Englands are doing, to which the NFL would say, oh, no, Green Bay's unique. They have a fan base that's international. They're unique. They're not like every other team. To which the NFLPA would say, naturally, okay, show us everyone else. And, of course, the NFL says, no.
Yeah,
there's do that.
Well, and now the MLB is starting to get into this problem, right? Because they're saying it's going to be a 50-50 revenue split. And Trevor Bauer came out and was like, well, how do we know if it's a 50-50 revenue split unless the MLB teams are allowing us to see the books? No professional sports team, aside from the Packers, has openly flaunted how much money they make. That's the last thing they want to do. How will the MLB get over that? If the NFL has to do this, if the salary cap has to go down, how will that all happen? I don't think I see that happening, to be honest with you.
I don't either. I covered both these negotiations and even was involved before that with the NFL. That request has always drawn a stalemate. Owners are never going to do it. We can all debate why, but owners aren't doing it in football, and they're not doing it in baseball. The baseball thing is front and center right now, Pat. Here's what the problem is. Players thought, okay, you want an 81-game season instead of a 162-game season? We'll take half. If I'm supposed to make $5 million, I'll make $2.5. If I'm supposed to make $10 million, I'll make $5. Good, we're good. And owners have said, no. It's not that simple. We're not going to a straight prorated here. We're, like you said, we're doing a share of revenues. And you know what that means? That means the MLB, who has never, ever, ever been able to get what other leagues have, a salary cap, is using this pandemic to get what they couldn't get in bargaining.
Them scumbags!
Now, it's strategic. So we have a cap. And the players will get their share of the cap, and it probably won't come out to prorated half your salary. It definitely won't. It'll be less. But they know, besides those names you see out in the media, the silent majority of MLB players, and I say NFL players, and I say hockey, and I say basketball too, just want to play. They want to play. They want to play. So this is where owners have leverage once again. These are not CBA negotiations, but really, in fact, they are. They're doing a CBA based on the pandemic, and this is where owners can leverage players because of the short careers, because they want to play, and because a lot of them feel invincible to the disease.